All right. The tools that you guys are gonna need mostly for this are your rib tools. So you should have a plastic one, a metal one, and a wooden one. Make sure that you rinse them off, you know, depending on what color clay you worked with before, just so that when we're going in, you have like a really nice surface to paint on, and you won't have, you know, a random like streak blended in. I personally like this tool a lot. The plastic ones are pretty good too. The other tool you're gonna want is your wooden stick tool. You'll notice it has like a little bit of like a, kind of like a, almost like a loop going up here. It's really good to use with like your thumb or press down like this. Now I know with, or when we looked at some of the Motto Ortiz pots, they were using like a piece of bone they use, and I actually do have some of those in class. I just didn't have enough to give out, but it's like a bone folder for paper, but they use it to smooth the pottery. It's very, very similar to this. We're not going to use any slip on these. We're going to make them the traditional way, but I do want you guys to have your template. All right, super, 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 super important, because we're going to be using this. And I made like such a super cheesy joke this morning, because we're going to measure it in 4 places, and I was like the 4 corners region. Oh my goodness. To start this off, I want you guys to start with a pinch pot. And the reason being is because if you look at the traditional pottery, it was made using a bowl or some type of plaster structure to actually form the base of the vase and or pottery. This is going to allow us to have more of like a structure to then build upon, rather than sometimes coil pots will be started with like a cutout circle and then built up that way. So the reason I want to start with a pinch pot is so that we'll have a really nice area to build upon. About this much clay is most likely good to start your pinch pot. And remember, these are all probably, you know, between about 7 inches or so. Now, it's very, very, very important that you get a super smooth pinch pot, okay? Because this is going to be your base. Once you have your ball of clay, take your thumb and you're gonna press it into the ball of clay approximately 3/4 of the way. It's really hard to show on camera, like the inside, because it's just shadowed, but it goes about up to here. I'm then gonna go in and I wanna use my entire hand to pinch. All right, so I'm gonna just start going in, and I don't wanna rest it on the table yet, because I wanna be able to determine the shape I want before, you know, I go ahead and tap it down on the table. It's gonna get bumpy, that's okay, we'll smooth it out. You could then go in and go with 2 hands, and it becomes a little bit easier. You'll notice that your pinch pot will crack a little bit as you're moving along, and you know what, that's okay. You could kind of just smooth it over. And I'm keeping the base here almost a little pointed so that when I go and tap it down, I'll have like a really nice flare starting. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna rest the pinch pot down like this. And I'm gonna go into any of like the super bumpy areas, like you see this one here, and just tap a little bit of clay onto it and smooth it in. we'll go in later and smooth these up like super, super smooth. We're gonna burnish them and make them all shiny. But it's important that you have this pretty smoothed. Now, this is for larger areas, you know, that you need to almost fill in. Other tools that are good for smoothing are your rib tools. So you could really go in with those, and you'll notice that it'll start to compress the clay a little bit and make it flatter. This is a larger blue rib tool. I know some of them were a little larger, some were smaller, depending on what I happen to have. But I'm using this to get it super, super smooth. And then kind of go in with my hands and smooth it up a little too. Sometimes the more you work with a piece of clay, it gets a little bit dry. So try to avoid, when you're making a pinch pot, if it's starting to crack on the top, it means it's starting to get a little too dry. There's two things you could do. One, you could start fresh. Two, you could cover it with some damp paper towels and then go back to it tomorrow. You want to make sure that you have a pretty good lip around the edges here, because this is where we're going to be attaching our first coil. So essentially we're creating a bowl just like, you know, they did, and then we're going to build upon it. We want it to be fairly sturdy but not too thick. All right, so now I'm going to take a look at my template. And I'm going to kind of line it up with this. And I can see that it definitely needs to go out a little bit further. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and I like the shape I started with. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attach it to my board by kind of tapping it into shape and making it as even as you can. So the top should be very, very even. And you want to make sure that it's really compressed down so that the bottom part of it is nice and flat and stable. I'm going to go in and I'm just going to fill this little piece. And when you're pinching your pot, just be gentle with it. So this is my template here. I would go in and I would push it out a little bit. Push it out a little bit over here. Over here. And over here. So I'm just gonna kind of flare that out because I know all around now I need it to be pushed out a little bit. The template's gonna come in a little bit more useful once we start adding our coils on. So I have my pinch pot. I will go in and I'll smooth it more later, but this is gonna be the base. You guys wanna make sure that you have a lot of room, all right? So a big space like this, something that you can roll the coil on. You know, these are little guys, so we don't need really long coils. But when you're making a coil, you want to really compress the clay between your hands. That's going to get rid of any air bubbles, and it's also going to make it so much easier for you guys to roll out your coil. You're already making a cylindrical shape. We're going to go from our fingertips all the way to our palm, and you're going to start in the center and work your way out. So I'm rolling in the middle and then kind of moving my hands out. In the middle, and I'm not applying a ton of pressure. You could see sometimes one side will get a little bit smaller than the rest. Just go in and focus on that area then. And the idea is to try to make it all pretty much the same size. If you're working with coils that are not even, you're gonna run into some problems later. So one thing not to do, we're gonna wanna do individual coils. The reason is because that's gonna help us make a nice pot. You're not gonna wanna just keep wrapping them around like this. It's gonna get wild and wacky, and we're trying to get a nice smooth piece of pottery. A few things that may happen when working with coils. The first one is that you might have an air pocket in it like this, so that when you start rolling it out, it will kind of start to compress really weird. The second one is it'll start to get thin in some areas. So if I apply too much pressure, like with one of my fingers, and I'm not really using like my palm, I'm just going back and forth like that, I might start to run into a problem like that. So you want to make sure that you're using the whole width of your hand and back. So to attach your first coil on, because we're not using slip, you're going to want to pinch it on a little bit, ever so slightly. And my first one, I'm just kind of resting on the top of it. We will go over how to like flare your coils out a little bit, but this one's probably gonna pretty much line up. And what it's gonna do as well is it's gonna bring the base out a little because this coil is out a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just going to cut my coil. And I'm gonna attach them together. Now, where these attach, you're gonna notice, you know, it's not as even as the rest of it. So take a little bit of clay and just smooth it in there and get it nice and even. Now, when I'm coiling and making a coil pot, I like to kind of break it into thirds. Now, when I'm smoothing it, I don't do this, but you know, just to kind of show you guys, pretend that the coil is separated in thirds. All right, so you have your first third, your middle, and then your third third. All right, so it's gonna be something like that. We want the middle area to be what's left, so you have a really nice rim to continue to work with. When smoothing in a coil, you want to make sure that you are really stabilizing it. Pretend that you're picking your cup up like this, however, you're not. All right, so pretend like it would be like you're picking this up. You would need to apply pressure to pick it up. So we're gonna apply a similar amount of pressure, but we're not moving it because you wouldn't, you know, squeeze a cup and just kind of lift it up. I'm gonna use my thumb and I'm just going to push down